The sky did not turn dark all at once. At first, it looked like a distant storm, low on the horizon, a strange brown smear stretching across the flat land. Farmers paused their work and stared. They had seen storms before. They had survived droughts. They believed this would pass, too. They were wrong. What rolled toward them was not rain. It was the land itself. By the time the wind arrived, the sun had vanished. Day collapsed into night. Dust forced its way into mouths, lungs, eyes, beds, food, and prayers. Chickens suffocated where they stood. Children screamed as mothers pressed wet cloths against their faces, hoping breath would still come. This was not a single storm. This was the beginning of something that would break an entire way of life, and history would almost forget it. In the early 1930s, America was already wounded. Banks were collapsing. Jobs were disappearing. Hope was thin. But in the heart of the country, far from cities and headlines, another disaster was unfolding. The Great Plains were dying. Years of deep plowing had stripped the land of its natural protection. Grass that once held the soil together was gone. When drought arrived, there was nothing left to anchor the earth. No roots, no moisture, no mercy. The wind did the rest. It lifted millions of tons of topsoil into the air and carried it across states: Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, New Mexico. Entire counties were swallowed by dust. Fences disappeared. Roads vanished. Houses filled like graves. People called them black blizzards, but blizzards end. This did not. Families tried to endure. They sealed windows with rags and tape. They hung wet sheets over doors. They ate grit with every meal. They slept with dirt between their teeth. Babies developed dust pneumonia, their lungs slowly filling with the land their parents had tried to farm. Cattle starved, standing in fields that no longer grew grass. Crops failed year after year. Wells dried, hope thinned, and still, most of America barely noticed. There were no dramatic explosions, no single moment of destruction, just endless suffering, stretched over years, grinding people down quietly, that made it easy to ignore. When the dust storms grew worse, some families made a choice that felt like failure. They left. Cars were packed beyond reason, mattresses tied to roofs, everything else abandoned. They followed rumors of work westward, toward California, believing the land there would save them. Instead, many found suspicion, poverty, and exploitation. They became migrants. Then statistics. Then footnotes. Their suffering did not fit neatly into heroic narratives. Children grew up too fast. They watched parents break under pressure. They learned hunger before they learned safety. Schooling stopped. Childhood shrank. Dust erased more than land. It erased futures. Some tried to stay. Those who remained buried dead animals in dust instead of soil. They shoveled earth out of kitchens every morning. They learned to live with darkness at noon. And through it all, the wind kept blowing. The federal government eventually intervened. Programs were created. New farming techniques introduced. Trees planted as windbreaks. Slowly, painfully, the land began to recover. But the damage had already been done. An entire generation carried scars no photograph could show. The Dust Bowl did not just destroy farms. It shattered trust in the land, instability, in the promise that hard work always leads to survival. It taught people something cruel, that nature does not negotiate. Today, the Dust Bowl is often reduced to a chapter, a paragraph, a backdrop to the Great Depression, its victims rarely named, their suffering summarized. But for those who lived through it, the memory never faded. They remembered the sound of wind against walls, the taste of dirt in water, the fear of watching the sky turn black at noon. They remembered how quietly it all happened. No invasion, no declaration, just the slow erasure of life. The fields look peaceful now. Grass has returned. Crops grow again. The storms are gone. But beneath the surface, the lesson remains that progress can destroy what it depends on, that suffering without spectacle is easily forgotten, and that history often remembers cities before it remembers soil. The Dust Bowl was not just an environmental disaster. It was a human one, and for millions who endured it, the land did not simply fail them, it swallowed them, slowly. Silence followed the storms, not relief, not peace, just the absence of wind, heavy and uncertain, like the land itself was holding its breath. For those who survived the worst years of the Dust Bowl, the end did not feel like survival. It felt like exhaustion, a deep, bone-level fatigue that no rain could wash away. The storms stopped, but what they had taken was gone forever. Land could be replanted, houses could be rebuilt, but something inside people had shifted. Many who left never returned. They built new lives in unfamiliar places, carrying accents that marked them as outsiders. They worked fields that were not theirs, harvested crops they would never own. The word Oki followed them like a shadow, a label stripped of dignity. They learned quickly that escape did not mean safety. Hunger still waited, exploitation still existed, and the shame of leaving home, of abandoning land passed down through generations, cut deeper than dust ever had. Back on the plains, those who stayed lived cautiously. They respected the land now, not as something to conquer, but as something that could turn without warning. Farming became an act of restraint rather than ambition. The soil was treated gently. The wind was watched carefully. The past was never far. Children of the Dust Bowl grew into adults who rarely spoke of it. They avoided the subject, not because they had forgotten, but because memory carried weight. They remembered coughing fits that lasted days. They remembered burying pets that suffocated. They remembered parents crying quietly at kitchen tables, hands blackened by soil that refused to grow food. And they remembered how invisible it all felt. Cities dominated headlines. Stock markets defined the depression. Political speeches spoke of recovery. Meanwhile, entire rural communities dissolved without ceremony. No monuments marked their suffering, just empty land. Historians would later call the Dust Bowl a lesson in environmental mismanagement, a warning about farming practices, a case study. But to those who lived it, it was personal. It was watching a father stare at a field that had fed his family for decades and realize it was dead. It was a mother rationing flour while pretending not to be hungry. It was children learning that the sky itself could become an enemy. And perhaps that is why the Dust Bowl is remembered so quietly, because it forces an uncomfortable truth. That disaster does not always arrive with noise, that suffering does not require spectacle, and that progress, when careless, can consume the very people it promises to uplift. Today, highways cross the plains, crops sway gently in controlled rows, towns appear stable, ordinary, forgettable. But beneath that calm surface lies a history written in dust, a history of people who did everything they were told, followed every rule, worked until their bodies failed, and still lost everything. The Dust Bowl did not just erase soil. It erased certainty. It taught America that the land remembers how it is treated, that neglect accumulates quietly, and that when the reckoning comes, it does not ask permission. The storms are gone now, but the silence they left behind still lingers, a reminder that some of the greatest disasters in history are not remembered because they were dramatic, but because they were endured.